Pregame.com.
All right, guys, pregame.com. I'm SleepyJ, joined here by the one and the only Dave Essler, professional sports bettor. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about Super Bowl betting and when it comes to what options we have to bet in the Super Bowl. One of the first things I want to ask Uncle Dave, how much money do you think is bet in the Super Bowl?
Well, that's a good question. I know in 2019, the American Gaming Association estimated 6 billion, and that was sort of pre every state letting you do it anymore. I think last year they came up with 6.8 billion. I'm sure that doesn't account for all the illegal betting, if you will. So, it's a lot of money. I was trying to look up and I couldn't find it for argument's sake, as how much money was bet on the NBA Finals, but it's not a billion. I mean, it pales in comparison to the Super Bowl. I mean, that's a lot of money. We're talking billions.
With that much money being bet into the Super Bowl, does that change how you approach, betting for that particular game?
Well, in terms of betting on this side, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's one game, and you're going to hear it ad nauseum. Professional bettors aren't going to bet any more on the Super Bowl. In fact, they may bet less than they would in another game because, as far as sides goes, you don't really have an edge. When you have that much money, you have a very liquid market, probably the most liquid of the year. Liquid market being defined as a market with many available buyers and sellers, and we obviously have that. And when you have a liquid market, despite sort of changes in supply and demand. And, we can look, we're taping this before the championship conference game. So, look at it this way, look at the Packers and the Bucks, lots of buyers, lots of sellers, and the line kind of stable after a day. And so that spread between what the buyer wants to pay and what the sellers offer remains relatively small. So, you're not going to see a huge fluctuation in the line. I mean, you saw it earlier when people are trying to grab 3.5 with a box or 4 with the box. Now it's 3, so they're taking the Packers. They're buying numbers, but the more money that gets in there, the more money it's going to take to move it, and it is probably not going to move. So I guess the takeaway from that is, aside from the fact that it's only one game, there's really no rush to bet on the Super Bowl next Sunday night unless you are ready, willing, and able with a number that comes out that probably won't be there very long. Then you might as well wait and think it all through.
Now, when you talk about the liquid market, I'm assuming that you would include prop bets with that liquid market as well, or were you just specifically talking about sides? Because from what I've heard over the last, I would say maybe like 5 years or so, since sports betting's kind of amped up here in the United States, is that, the prop bets have taken in, millions upon millions. They're two separate markets, correct?
Yeah, they absolutely are, Sleepy. And, you're right. I was referring to strictly, picking the winner of the game against the point spread. And props are so different. And yes, they bring in a lot of money, but they have a lot of props. If you look at a typical, AFC, NFC championship game this upcoming weekend, you might have 20 available props that, and even that may be a stretch depending on what book you have. But when you get to the Super Bowl, you have hundreds because books know everybody and their brother wants some action on it, and they're going to throw out prop bets that some of them are like, who would dream that up? But it will take in action, so they're going to put it out there. And the difference in the markets being that prop bets typically have relatively low limits. Because they have low limits and they're not quite as liquid of a market, it will take a lot less money to move that prop. If it's somebody's total receptions, it would take a ton to move it from 6 to 6.5, but it wouldn't take much to move it from 6 over minus 110 to 6 over minus 150. So those are ones you do kind of want to jump on early, and pro bettors will be probably breaking. I know I will be breaking it down probably all day Sunday, and try to pick some off before everybody else gets in, because again, a few $100 at a book is going to move a prop quite a bit at times.
So speaking about props there, Uncle Dave, when it comes to you making prop bets in the Super Bowl, are you looking for anything particular?
Not yet, but I think what you have to do is you have to handicap the game, and how you think the game will play out. And and find props that make sense, not what you want to happen, which is truly not unlike any other game. You know, for example, the Chiefs and the Browns last week. A lot of people thought that the Browns would be dumping the ball off to Kareem Hunt, so his props were relatively high, both in terms of yardage and catches. But that's not what the Browns did. And now there was no way to probably know that, but I know a lot of people probably lost a lot of money taking those over props. But it's still the right thing to do to think about how that game is going to play out, and you really got to think it through and come up with something that makes sense. I think is the best way to put it. Not just oh I think. You don't want to think. You want to have some solid evidence, I guess, if you will. It's kind of like a trial lawyer. You have to go through and look, and if you're looking at Devontae Adams or whatever, just look at what he did through the year against particular defenses and in certain situations and targets, and then you come down, you can say, well, yeah, that's a good idea, or maybe that's not a good idea. So that's the way I look at him anyway.
I think you make a good point there, Uncle Dave, that these games are different. You have regular season football, you're talking week 4 NFL, and, we particularly handicap games a certain way, throughout pretty much the majority of the season until we get into, kind of like that playoff crunch time. But I think you would agree here, when it comes to the playoffs and especially like these particular games that are coming up this weekend and the Super Bowl, teams do play different. So the props, they're actually going to play different as well, and we bet those differently. Now, when it comes to, let's just say like a 50-50 type of prop, or you get, those offshore markets where, a lot of the American sports bettors can't bet, maybe like the national anthem or the color of the Gatorade. When it comes to those particular props in these type of games, are there ones that you're specifically looking at, and are there ones that you are specifically like trying to avoid?
Well, there's two types of prop bets, Sleepy. There's skilled prop bets, for lack of a better way to put them, and that's kind of what we just talked about is what happens on the field, and then there's your novelty prop bets, if you will. What color's the Gatorade going to be? And I avoid those at all costs. And one reason I would avoid what colors the Gatorade is going to be is, okay, they're giving you four options. Now, unless I mean, lots of times people know. Um, you know, Skilled prop bettors will do everything they can to get that inside information, if you will. But, if they give you four colors to pick, color is going to be dumped on the winning coach. Well, you know, each one of those is minus 110, for example. And in reality, your implied odds are 25%. Where's the value really there in doing that, if you follow my logic? You're making a bet that you need to win 52% of the time to break even, when in fact you have a 1 in 4 chance of being right. So, I mean, do the math. It's just something that I try to avoid. And I would never tell people not to do that, because so many people bet on the Super Bowl that don't even know anything about football, and they want to have their bet still alive when the game's over. So, I mean, it's a cool thing to do, but from a money making standpoint, that would not be something that I would look to do. There's millions of those props, and hey, go for it. I don't begrudge anybody doing that. Just realize that it's fun, and when I put out a package for people, I'll pick a side and I'll put in a lot of prop bets that we've been pretty successful with over the years, but the majority of them are what I would call actionable or skilled prop bets that have a reasonable chance of cashing, as opposed to gee, I think we haven't had blue Gatorade in 4 years, so it's about time, because it's just not a plus EV thing to do.
So one final question here, Uncle Dave. When it comes to prop bets, I think that you would agree that the information that's going to be out there is going to be in two regards. You're going to end up with sharp information, and you're going to end up with somewhat, let's just say, public information, which we would say, maybe on the news stations, the radio stations, and things like that. When you look at that particular type of information, what are you necessarily doing with the prop bet information that you're receiving?
Well, that's a good question, because you do have 2 weeks and there is a cycle, and personally, I want to make my bets before I receive that information. I want to originate that information if I can, because I think what's going to happen, I know professional bettors that will tell you this happens, is if I've made a bet and I like, player A under X number of completions, I'm probably not going to put that out there before I bet it, because once it's out there and then it matriculates, that market will move fairly quickly, as we discussed earlier. It doesn't take a huge influx of cash to move those numbers. A lot of pro bettors on Twitter, and most people know who they are. They're not going to give out this is my favorite prop without having betting it first. And odds are, before you get a chance to bet it, it's probably already moved some. So it's probably okay to still bet it. But that information filters its way up to ESPN and the NFL Network, and they'll be saying, "Oh well, this matchup is not good for this guy, and if this game plays out that way." Well, by the time they throw it out there, it's probably too late for value. But then again, the way I look at those things, because I can't possibly keep up with it all by myself. So yeah, I do rely on sources, if you will. But I think the way you have to look at it is, okay, look at all the props when they first come out, and sort of mark what your favorite ones are, or bet them, but then kind of follow them, because you'll see who's got the information and where it's going as those lines move. And if you haven't done that sort of by the end of week one, if you will, then you probably want to wait, because those prop bets just get beat to crap. So it's kind of a microcosm with a lot of little microcosms, because there's so many prop bets of a regular NFL game, really. And there's a lot of good sharp prop players, because as we talked earlier, it's not nearly as liquid of a market as the side and the total might be. So that's where your advantages really are.
I think what you mentioned there, Uncle Dave, is rather interesting, knowing that that we are within the sharp betters, that we can get the information early, we can get the number early. And you had mentioned that this market, at least the prop market, is so much more liquid than it normally is throughout the year, that once this information gets up to the mainstream media, and everybody else starts piggybacking and chasing that steam, and it pushes that number so far out of whack, that I'm guessing that there are probably a lot of sharp betters that are betting one way the minute those props come out, and then they're betting back the other way, with these big, massive middles that you normally just don't see during the regular season. So would you say that's fair to say, Uncle Dave, that the sharpest of the sharp betters are probably end up betting maybe even both sides within some of those prop bets?
Yeah, absolutely, Sleepy, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we're just kind of going through this, scratching the surface. But and you and Chris and Hitman, and we talk about this all year long, that if you have an awful lot of outs, or maybe you don't even need an awful lot, maybe just three, you know, there's a lot of variance right out of the gate. You could have, I'll pick on Devontae Adams again. May not be Tampa Bay, but you could have one book on Sunday night that would have Devontae Adams over 6.5 receptions at -110 or whatever. There'd be another book that has over 8 at -130 and under 8 at even money. So, they're going to bet both of them before any market moves anything, and basically have minimal risk that he winds up with 7. I mean, that's what people do. They'll just scalp that, and the same would be for rushing yards and whatnot. Somebody will have over 75. Another book will have over 87. I mean, there's a huge middle there, and that will happen very early, and then as the market moves, it will happen again throughout the week. I mean, these people that do nothing but that with 100 screens open, just looking for those middles. So yeah, good point, Sleepy.
Now, what about some of those like goofy bets, Uncle Dave? Like we've seen, let's just say first score in the Super Bowl. Maybe let's just say, I mean, I remember the one year there was a safety. Sometimes you see defensive touchdowns, block punts, block field goals, return touchdowns. When it comes to like those particular props in general, are there any that like you're like, there's no way in hell I'm betting that in the Super Bowl?
I can't say no way in hell, because I've done some things I never said I would, but you know, typically, I mean, just look at the numbers. I think these are from 2019. I haven't seen 2020s yet. There were 266 games played, and there were 14 safeties, which means there's about a 5.2% chance that there's going to be a safety. So technically, no safety would be roughly minus 1900. So having a safety to occur should be plus 1300, give or take. And yet the yes for a safety is usually, plus 7 or plus 800. So, the books kind of got you by the short hairs there if that's a bet you were going to make. And, there's, a little bit more of a maybe an opportunity for defensive or special teams touchdowns because I think there were 65 defensive touchdowns in 266 games, and I'm not sure what a defensive or special team score is. It's usually probably somewhere around plus 300, but if you do those numbers, there's about a 24% chance that would happen. So a book would sell that for about plus 300. So, there may be a little bit of value in that one, but, sometimes you got to do the math and, that just kind of comes full circle to, hey, if you want to bet that there's going to be a safety and you got $100 to lose at plus 7 or plus 800, fine, go for it. And I've done that before, but it's also totally minus EV when that bet should be plus 1300. So just think of it as this is fun money and I might make a little, or if you're a serious bettor, that would be not a bet I would want to make.
Yeah, it sounds to me, Uncle Dave, like you're trying to tell me that the sports books will attach like extra taxes on anything that you're trying to buy, in particular for the Super Bowl, and they're not going to give you, any type of bargain because I think one of the things is, at least from what it sounds like, what you're saying is that there's so much money involved, there's so many people involved that they know there's probably a lot of schmucks out there that may be doing this just for fun or whatever the case might be, and maybe they don't really care about that 2 cents, 4 cents, 6 cents, 10 cents, because as you had mentioned, make sure you're doing the math, and that's one of the things that at least us sharp betters, we particularly try to do the math throughout the season, but we know when it comes time for the Super Bowl that there's a lot more math that's probably involved to know if you're actually getting a half decent bet, and some of these bets, when you're just the safety that you gave in his example, it seems like you're being, I don't want to say ripped off, but it seems like you're being ripped off. Would I be right in saying that?
Well, yeah, exactly. That I mean, that's my point. I mean, you're paying entirely too much for something you shouldn't have to. Bear in mind that that particular prop is not even offered anytime except for the Super Bowl. I mean, maybe rarely in some corners of the world, but how often can you bet that there will or won't be a safety? It's in the Super Bowl, and the books have that hold. It's like a ridiculous number. When you were talking, it kind of brought me to another one. You look down sometimes when you see the line, and you'll see, okay, Buffalo wins by 1-3. Buffalo wins by 3-5. It goes on and on and on up to Buffalo wins by 50. So there's like 40 of those you could possibly bet, and they're all like, I don't know, plus 200 until you get up into the, you know, astronomical, Buffalo wins by 40. Well, then it's, plus a million, but it probably should be plus 5 million. But, who's at an advantage there? Um, the books are, because how many people are betting those? A lot. And at plus 200, they've got that money spread out so thin. I mean, it's a total win-win for the book. So, that would be another one that I don't even look at. And quite frankly, if I did want to look at it, the point spread and the total pretty much tell you all you need to know, because again, this is such a fluid market. So kind of work backwards off of that. If team A is favored by 3 points, well, they're probably not going to win by 21. Don't make that bet. The alternate total, well, they combined for 65 points. Well, plus 500, highly unlikely. But, again, and I'll just, I'll reiterate, hey, if you want to do that with a little bit of money and have a little fun, go for it. But unless you are doing the work or paying somebody else to do the work, you're at a significant disadvantage.
All right, well, we'll take those lessons learned there from Uncle Dave and we'll apply them to our Super Bowl betting. Uncle Dave, we will have more to talk about when it comes to Super Bowl betting and Super Bowl props, but I don't want to run this one too long. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'll get with you again maybe later on in the week and we can go ahead and we can discuss some other things when it comes to Super Bowl betting. But with that said, that's all we have for this. You guys can find us on pregame.com. You can get Uncle Dave on Twitter at Dave_Essler. And make sure you check us out here at pregame.com for more sports betting information.